Welcome to the Women of Distance podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Kramer. These are the stories of motivated women chasing big dreams in the distance running world. You'll hear from women who are crushing it on the trails, the track, and the road. These are not just the stories of women's results at the top of the sport, but the full story of how she got there, the challenges, failures, successes, lessons, and life between the miles. Women of Distance is proudly supported by Open Fuel, sports nutrition to fuel your adventure. Check out their products and their mission at openfuel.co and use code WOD for 20% off your order every time. You can also visit the Women of Distance Substack to read more behind the scenes happenings, including how I'm using Open Fuel in my own training. Women of Distance is also supported by our good friends and fellow trail runners at Summit Roasters. Roasted fresh in my hometown, you can support the podcast by visiting summit-roasters.com and using code WOD15 for 15% off every order. You can find all of these links and codes in the show notes, and know that we really appreciate you supporting those supporting us. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy. Okay, I am hanging out with Tina Muir today, elite athlete, podcaster, author, environmental advocate, and now ultra runner. That is a lot of things I just listed. That's not the full depth and picture of who you are. Tina, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I haven't been on a podcast in a good few months, so this is kind of exciting for me to be joining you here on something that's so, I guess, become important to me of women, distance running, women, leadership, kind of all wrapped into one. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. I think we're going to talk about some things too that maybe it's been a while since listeners have heard you talk about. I just listed off a lot of things and hats and titles that you have worn over the years, but I really want to start our conversation by going back in time and talking all the way through your full story. Where did athletics of any kind first enter your life?
Oh, of any kind. I think my dad would say of any kind. It began when I started racing boys down the hill on the little plastic trikes, age 3. I don't know if I've ever shared that before, but I love the way you worded that question. But yes, I think that's maybe where my dad first clocked that I was a competitive human.
I love that.
But beyond that, I don't actually think I was too specifically athletic in any way. I remember vividly finishing 5th in my class out of the girls at a sprint, and there was probably only 12 girls in my class, so very much average. In maybe age 10. And then yeah, I have shared the story before, but again, it has been a while that we had in England, we have cross country, or had, I don't know if it still is the case, had cross country was one of the rotations you had to do in PE class. And I remember kind of being somewhat near the front, but then hiding in the bathrooms when it was the quote unquote tryouts. We didn't call it that, but that's the American word for it, I suppose. Hiding in the bathrooms because I didn't want to do it. I, looking back now, suspect that was probably more to do with it wasn't a cool thing to do. And so I probably knew that I would get on the team and didn't want to. But somehow, no memory, somehow I did end up on the team. So I'm assuming my PE teachers were like, hey, you, so you need to do this anyway. And then, yeah, that was kind of when it really began, age 14. I remember finishing 4th in a local race in my town and thinking 4th is not that far away from 1st. And that kind of began the itch of seeing what I was capable of. That began my journey, I think.
I think this is kind of a funny story of that gap from your 3-year-old self racing the boys on the tricycles to actually discovering your competitive self as a teenager later in running. What do you think accounted for that gap in your competitive nature, or maybe understanding your competitive nature?
Yeah, I think it was still there. I played, we have a sport in England called netball, which is no dribbling, so it's only passing, and there's no backboard, and it's a smaller net. And I played netball I did play field hockey. I played tennis. Like I played other things that were competitive. But I think, maybe I wasn't specifically good enough at any of them for it to really awaken that. And that probably goes back to that 3-year-old. Maybe one of the times I went down the hill and I was at the same speed as the boys who were older than me and was like, ooh, I don't know. So maybe for me, it has to be something within reach for it to like awaken within me. And I just wasn't skilled enough with the ball sports to really, get it set up.
So, talk a little bit about when running did enter your life and you started to become curious about how you could advance yourself, where you could grow.
Mm-hmm.
What were you discovering about yourself along the way and enjoying about the sport itself?
I remember once I started to get good enough, probably around that time I finished 4th, a PE teacher saying to me, you should join a club, which is the way we do it in England. It's not so much my school cross country team was essentially my PE teacher taking us to a field once a week and dropping us off and then picking us up again. So a PE teacher saying like you should join a club, suggesting a club, meeting a coach there who ended up being my coach all the way through. I owe everything to him, Brad. And then I think the relationship with it was I honestly, this is an interesting, probably not where you think I'm going to go with this, but one of the pieces I would say ties into this podcast specifically and what we've talked about so far is pretty quickly I realized I was doing very little compared to other people who were at my level or were at the next level. And I was very eager to do more and more and more. But my coach was absolutely determined that he wanted me to run well as a 20, 30, 50, 40, 50 beyond year old. And so he was very intentional to hold me back, which he knows this, I've spoken about it before. I found it very frustrating because I wanted to do more. I wanted to like be up at the top. But now I cannot thank him enough for holding me back and accepting that he was never going to be the one that got the fame of me being my coach. But that said, I really I thrived on the workouts. I loved pushing myself. It wasn't for the majority of the time. I wouldn't say it was about anyone else. I was always someone that came from the back. So I wasn't like with my ego up at the front trying to hold on. I loved passing. I loved just like seeing what I could do. And that's so yeah. The tough workouts were there, but I also I feel like. I actually was still horse riding at that time, and I think that helped me stay balanced so that I didn't get carried away mentally and emotionally with obsessing over running.
It sounds like he had to have really seen something in you to be able to instill that restraint and wanting you to have longevity in your career, and also probably speaks to just his personality at the same time.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about from those early days then, where your running career evolved and where it took you into your young adult years.
Yeah, so I worked my way up the field, and I truly did. The first time I ran in the English or the British championships, I finished 222nd. So, almost at the back. And then worked my way up to over the course of a few years, finishing 16th my like last year of high school. So I got to a level where I was, one of the top athletes. I was being recruited to the US to go run, which is ultimately where it led to. I again was still being held back at that point with my training. My training was probably less than half the other women I was competing against at that time. But it meant that I took a year off after high school. As in England, it's quite common to take a gap year. I did do that. And then when I started university in the US, I was very eager. I was very hungry to see what I could do and was motivated by the team atmosphere here in the US. It's very intense, the collegiate system, and I'd never known anything like that. But it led me to, really make the most of that opportunity. I was extremely successful in college. and then went on to do it professionally for a few years. And I did achieve my greatest goal of representing my country in a world championship and a European championship. And that was the highlight. But there was definitely moments along the way where there's some races I'm more proud of that weren't necessarily my highest finishes, but had overcome something that was, really challenging.
Yeah, elaborate on that a little bit and just how making that transition to collegiate and then professional running maybe changed the sport or your perspectives on it, and
Mm.
how you kind of evolved in the background as your running career was growing and evolving as well.
Um, I'll start with college. That was interesting because I went from a stage of being maybe less committed, well, definitely less committed during that gap year, to being extremely committed. And then by the end of that, it taking me a solid year before my fitness kind of came back to where it was after that year of not really doing too much and maybe eating a lot of a lot of junk food for like every single meal as an 18-year-old. And so once it kind of came back, then, to tie your question together, I moved towards, as many runners do, a stage of obsession where it was like running was my entire life. I broke up with my boyfriend because I like quote unquote wanted to focus on my running. It was every thought, it was every minute. It was I didn't run with the team anymore because I was like, oh, they're too slow for me, even though realistically they were running maybe on easy runs like 10-20 seconds per mile slower than I was. Like, it was not worth doing, but I was like, I gotta do this. So there was a lot of growth in terms of figuring out who I was. Obviously, that obsessive state tends to come when we don't feel and trust in ourselves enough, and we don't feel sure of ourselves. And it took some major injuries to really awaken me to, okay, more is not always better. Doing it yourself is not going to be better. And so over that period, I still kind of worked towards figuring out who I was and made strides, but also began to, and I think this is where we're probably going to head next, began to tie together this association of skinny equals fast. And over those collegiate years into the professional years, it began to tip towards looking fit was almost more important than actually running fast. I definitely made choices where I knew I was playing with fire in terms of fueling, but it meant that I looked a certain way, and it was a hollow version, but when I stood on the start line, I felt like I fitted in more with the other women. But obviously that's not a true confidence. That's the lies we tell ourselves version.
Do you feel like going professional, having sponsorship, having support was part of maybe like doubling down on that narrative for yourself, or adding that stress and pressure of any of that context?
I mean, I wasn't on a level of sponsorship to where I feel like I felt that more for me in college because I got a full ride. And so I knew that, especially coming from England at the time where university was free, and I, could have, it would have been a lot more reasonable, or the cost of going to university over here was exponentially higher than over there. So I knew the value of the money I was getting from the university. And so I would say more there. I struggled with that, knowing that this money was being invested in me. I was being brought across the world. I had the university looking at me, the athletic department looking at me, my teammates looking at me, everyone kind of essentially evaluating if I was worth that money. So I would say I felt it more there. The professional level, the elite level wasn't high enough to that to get that, but I'd say it was already a snowball rolling down the hill at that point. So everything added to it.
So you mentioned that you sort of knew that you were playing with fire and
Hmm.
played with it anyway. Talk a little bit about how this story then evolved for you into understanding maybe the depth of what you were doing with your body, with yourself here.
Yeah, yeah. So it really began with a comment, as it often does with many people, a comment that was not necessarily, the person had no idea at the time it would cause the level of spiraling it did, but a comment was made that's kind of sank into my brain. Had some factors from other people in my life who also had struggled with food, that then all those things I didn't realize I was absorbing could come out, and I had the template. um and so I became aware that I was thinking about it a lot, and very much like, I remember things like looking at restaurant menus ahead of time and being like, okay, what's something that's like not going to set off an alarm bell in someone, but it's still on the lower end of the calorie range, and so little choices like that. Or I'm going out for dinner tonight, so if I'm going to go out to dinner tonight, I know I'm probably going to eat more than I normally would. So I'm going to not eat much today. So these are little behaviors I started to make. But, as with everything, you write those off in your brain. You say, well, I'm just being smart because like, I know I'm going to like let myself eat whatever I want tonight. Or, I'm doing this because I want to eat really nourishing foods, and the only option is fried chicken, and I don't want to eat fried chicken because that's gross in my body. So you can justify them in your brain, but yes, there is this like gnawing feeling deep down of like, that you are harming yourself and you're putting yourself at risk. Now, I had the benefit slash misfortune, I don't know which way you could look at it both ways. I really didn't get many injuries. I only had one bone issue, and it wasn't a fracture, it was a reaction, which allowed me to get away with it. Once people start getting sacral stress fractures and femoral and hip stress fractures, the alarm bells really begin to ring. But I didn't have those. So it kind of affirmed in some ways, like, you're getting away with it, which made it worse, because I could just be like, well, I'm not injured, so I can keep going. Now I look back on that as a negative. At the time, it was obviously like, well, I'm fine. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, no, it does. Absolutely. When was the first time that you heard and understood the term red S or relative energy deficiency in sport, and also how it applied to you or if it
Mm.
applied to you?
Well, there's a few layers. One, the term wasn't really around until toward
Mm,
the end of my career, but there was the term female athlete triad at the
mm,
time. However, I would just taking another step back. When I first lost my period when I was 19, that first year, I think it was my second year in college. Yeah, yeah, because I was a young one, so that was a young child in the year. So I was probably 19, and the doctor had said it to me like, you lost your period because of running, and I was very much like, oh. But he very much was like, well, that's just a thing that happens with people who exercise a lot. There's not really any like alarm bells. He, sent me to an OBGYN, and then that person, did some tests to make sure there was nothing wrong, which there wasn't. But then it was just kind of like, well, when you stop running, it'll figure itself out. So I knew that like my body wasn't functioning correctly, but it was very much put in a thing of like, just the way it is. Um, but over the years, when it went year after year, approaching 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, you start saying to yourself, and I'm getting, mid to late 20s right now, I'm thinking like, well, but surely that's not good for my body, right? Like, isn't my body meant to have a cycle? So like you get that little voice that you can push away, but when it starts coming up more and more, it gets harder and harder to ignore. And that's when I started researching. That's when I read about female athlete triad, and then discovered that there was a lot more women who also were dealing with this. Um, and I just kind of in that moment was like, this is so common, but no one's speaking about it. So I found that really strange. And there was very little out there. So I banked a lot of this and thought, when I'm ready, I'm going to kind of speak to this more, because I don't have that fear that other people do of, I mean, of course I do, but I'm able to override that fear of like, what will people think if I become the one that kind of speaks out about it.
This is something I was really eager to talk about today. I feel like you just described yourself this way. You are someone who is willing to talk about it and be an example, and have really used your personal experience to learn, educate, inform, and open the subject for other people, create awareness for a lot of people in the world, I think. And you're an example to me of how to do that. You inspire me to do that in my own way, in my different way, to talk about things, to put things out there. Is there someone in your life who was an example of that for you? Or where did you, I don't know, discover that courage or that ability to just share in that way?
Ooh, I don't think I've ever been asked that before. There's a few people coming to mind. One is my grandma was German and very direct and to the point. I think there's definitely some of her in me. I also have an aunt who I'm still very close to. She also, my auntie Jenny, she's very, always been like a fierce women's advocate, ally, businesswoman. I learned a lot from her. And then Brene Brown comes to mind, but I don't know if Brene Brown was really that visible back then. So I don't know if it was, definitely not around then. But that's an interesting question of someone in my life who was someone who would speak out about things. I don't know if there is specifically, other than those two, my aunt and my grandma. But I have always felt I was always that person, even in school, who would say, when someone would say, "How are you?" I'd always be like, "Well, my tooth is really hurting today, and like that really sucks, and I just wish my tooth would feel better." I always was the one that was able to be honest. So I think it's kind of always been in me. But yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to think on that a bit more, because there has to be someone.
Hey folks, just a quick interruption to make sure to say thank you to Open Fuel for supporting the Women of Distance podcast. Open Fuel is sports nutrition to fuel your adventure. Check them out at openfuel.co. Right now, I'm loving their Ultra Fuel drink mix with 60 grams of carbs, 500 milligrams of sodium, all in one serving. And soon they'll be adding a gel mix to their product lineup. Again, check them out at openfuel.co and use code WOD to get 20% off your order every time and support the podcast at the same time. What was that process like for you then when you did start to put yourself out there and start to share this experience and this story and the things you were learning? What was that either for you or the reception that you were receiving as you started sharing things?
Yeah, I think I was a bit more maybe calculated with when I decided I was going to speak out on it. I was like, I'm going to speak out on it in a big way. And I was like, already decided I was going to like use this opportunity. And I did reach out to Runner's World. And I think that I knew going through Runner's World was the way to do it. It wasn't, I didn't want to like soft launch it. I wanted to like throw it out there. I did not, however, expect to have a 3-part update from People magazine, or Glamour, or Self, or any of those. Like, I didn't think it was going to stretch beyond running, but it turned out, there was all kinds of people reaching out to me, basketball players and hockey players, and all women from all kinds of sports, tennis, saying, that they too had struggled with this, and that surprised me with the reach of that. I thought, the long distance runners, the gymnasts, the figure skaters, I knew they would be in that bucket, but I didn't expect it to go beyond. So, that was a very surreal moment. It was very overwhelming in terms of the amount of people reaching out to me. And one of the things I did struggle with during that period, and still do sometimes now, is people, because I am very open and because of the way I speak, being very like sisterly, friendly, friendly in terms of like as a friend. People share like deep secrets. I mean, I've probably had hundreds of women tell me as the first person they told they were pregnant. Um, and so sometimes it gets a bit, or it did definitely then, gets a bit overwhelming in terms of people pouring their deepest, darkest secrets. They're really, the inner critic, the cruelest things they say. And I want to be there for them. I want to support them. I want to send a really long, loving message back. But obviously that always takes time. And back then it was thousands of people, and you just can't do that. So that was something that I didn't expect, was the individual outreach from people, and how I would almost feel helpless because I couldn't absorb all these stories and get back to them all.
So, talk about how that experience then and the overwhelming response changed the trajectory of what you were doing with this
Mm.
in terms of sharing. That was a broad this question.
Yeah, I think, I mean, at the time while I was doing this, I was trying to, get my own cycle back and working on my own healing journey. And then, spoiler alert, being pregnant and going through all the emotional, hormonal, physical changes there. I think what it did do for me was honed in on that process of how widespread this was, how easy it would be, especially once I knew I was having a daughter, how easy it would be for her to grow up in a society and a culture just like we have right now, of where, thinness is gold, and, you've got to be disparaging to yourself. You've got to like look this way and focus on this. So I think it forced me to continue the recovery for her and know that like I have to do this healing within myself and the way I view myself, because if I don't, she's going to get it from all around her anyway. But if she hears it at home too, or she watches me, the way I look at myself in the mirror. I mean, actually just yesterday, my daughter, my 5-year-old, was speaking to my best friend, and she said that she was watching me crack eggs, and then she said, and then I just did what mummy did, and she was cracking eggs. And so like she literally said she watched, and we know this, right, with kids, but she said she watched me crack an egg and then she copied what I did. And so yeah, what it did was refine this need. Okay, I have to change myself from a core point, not like it looks like it's great on the inside, on the outside, but it's not. I've not addressed it. I really had to do that, and so it kept me on that journey.
I love that. We are aware of it superficially, but sometimes you have those moments that's like, wow, they really are watching, they really are absorbing, and that really impacts the way that you move and speak and behave for yourself. Talk a little bit about how this response and the, I guess, the doors that it opened and created for you changed or maybe opened your perspectives to other ways that you could have an impact and other things that you are passionate about, and maybe developed a mission to change the world. In small, maybe that's the wrong big question. Yeah, small ways, small steps.
But. Yes. Well, I definitely always set aside I didn't want anyone to feel the way I felt, of feeling broken, feeling like there's something wrong with you. And particularly while Reds is no one is exempt from that. No size. It can be any size, any shape, any gender, any any physical body can have RED-S or RED symptoms. It doesn't matter how much you run or don't run, exercise or don't. So I didn't want anyone feeling that way. And so I did create these resources that are free on YouTube, on my Running for Real YouTube channel. And I wanted to make that so that people, I mean, it was part selfish, because then I had, if someone said to me, help me, then I could redirect them, here are the things I've collected up. But mostly it was also, I just didn't want anyone to feel that way, feel broken, feel alone, feel like, as a woman, my body was, you're told, and I hope this is changing, that your thing to do in this lifetime is to procreate, right? To have a baby. Like, it is changing now. I feel like there's a lot more openness towards, in some ways, openness towards like, you live your life how you want to live it. But I did feel a sense of shame for not being able to do that functioning. But you're right, it did also open the door to say, like, okay, what else do I want to speak to? And with that, how can I speak to other pieces of shame or guilt that people feel? And one of them is environmental. We all are aware of this world and the direction we're headed. And you know, even if someone is not environmentally conscious, I'm sure we've all had the thing of looking at the trash cans on trash pickup day and thought to ourselves, wait, if that's getting picked up every single week from every single house, like, where is this going to go? Like, eventually we're going to run out of space. And so at the time, all I was seeing was very extreme environmentalists of Greta Thunberg, who I admire, and I'm so grateful for her impact. She definitely has inspired like a nation and a whole group of people. But not everyone can sail across the Atlantic on a solar powered boat. So again, we're speaking to, how can I be a voice for people who aren't ready to take the full leap? They aren't ready to do the big things, but they can do something. So I wanted to be that voice. And it began to open that curiosity thanks to a close friend who pushed me to speak out.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that and how you have grown and evolved your sustainability advocacy, both in the sport and maybe outside the sport as well.
Yeah. So I think actually this is a very good example for people listening to this who have a passion and have something that is on their heart. It doesn't have to be environmental, but have never done anything publicly about it. I think this is a really good example of speaking up and things will fall into place. Same friend who said to me, you have this podcast platform, you have a social media platform, why do you not speak about this? And funny story, she actually was calling me about 1 minute. My phone was lighting up, so I don't know if she could tell I was about to speak about her, but she pushed me to say something, and so I decided I was going to do 100 days of environmental advocacy. So that would be giving people small steps they could take. So, a simple one that most people know: take your reusable bags to the store. Or it might be, when you go to a coffee shop, say, can I have a mug, please? So little things people could do to get going. And on the 8th day of doing that, I heard from the Chicago Marathon, who said, we'd like you to come, be a part of our sustainability team. And from there, it just snowballed. And so I love sharing that, because day 8, it only took 8 days of putting myself out there on my social media. And don't get me wrong, it didn't feel comfortable. Me like putting a video up, hey, here's me, happy day 8 of 100 days. Like, I knew those weren't getting big traction in terms of like, that's not going to go viral on social media. But I put myself out there anyway, and then something came of it. So once I started working with some of the major marathons, it really, people began to come to me for environmental advice or what they could do. And then I just started thinking about bigger ways I could, be the voice for runners. How can I translate what these races are doing, what people are doing, into a language that makes sense to the average person? But also, how could I have a bigger impact with these relationships in the running industry? How can I push the running industry to move towards environmentally conscious? And that's where examples like the Hemp Beer But Boulder-thon come in last year. And so my nonprofit Racing for Sustainability is where I'm putting a lot of my energy right now in, what can we do when we come together to change the running industry of this sport we love so much.
One of the things I love is you're talking about this starting with the Chicago Marathon. That's the second largest marathon in our country, I think. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I hope I have my data right there.
You do, but they keep they're all in this big race for the biggest, so
sure,
could flip again this year.
But one of the things, really staying true to your ethos of like, what are the small things that we can do? What are the daily actions that you
Mm,
can take? Is it seems like you are really passionate about helping the small races, the local races who maybe don't have the resources and the platform that something
yeah,
like the Chicago Marathon does to develop awareness, make change in their own small way, in their own community. I think that is very cool.
yeah. Thank you.
Um, I want to make this transition, but not quite yet, to trail and ultra, because we are talking about all of this advocacy and sharing and making an impact that you have done. And I don't want to leave out your running along the way in that journey.
Mm.
Talk a little bit about how, as all of this was developing and growing and evolving, your running was evolving along the way.
Yeah, yeah. I've been through many phases of my run journey. I mentioned that high school version, going to college, obsessing, yeah, very much becoming, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the striving was towards the representing my country in a world championship. That had always been my goal since I was 14, 15. Getting to do that. But then once I did that, I expected to, you know, get that opportunity and then be like, no, what else can I do? But instead, I found all the wind out of my sails after that moment. And I did run. I ran a PR like not long after it in the marathon, and then I ran another PR in December, like 6 months later. But then after that, it was all gone. And part of that was that breaking point physically of where I couldn't do it anymore. One of my major red symptoms was insomnia. I had horrific insomnia, and the lack of sleep, I just couldn't take it anymore. Not that it was just about that, but now I look back, that was definitely tied together. The pressure I put on myself as a runner and the insomnia, not being able to sleep. Um, so it was just wearing me down. When you're sleeping 5-6 hours a night and you're running 100 miles a week, it was wearing on me.
Mhm.
And so one random day I snapped, quit running, wasn't sure I would ever do it again. And that is when I began that recovery journey of amenorrhea, red S, getting my cycle back, getting pregnant. And then post my first daughter, I didn't know any other way. So I began training for a race. And did the Disney World half marathon. Won it, which is accomplishment, yes, but it wasn't anywhere near my personal best. And then did Boston the next April, and then in that Boston, I hated every second of that race. And so I hated it. I struggled in it. I ran like 20 minutes slower than my personal best, and I gave it everything I had. And so in that moment, I was like, something has to change. So then I began this journey that was like a give back period chapter of my life, where I transitioned into running as a guide for friends who were visually impaired or double amputees or had had traumatic brain injuries, my friend with Down syndrome. So it was very much a period of like, how can I serve and support others on their own journeys? But I think I counted it too much, to the point to where it started injuring me. And eventually I needed Achilles surgery, which is kind of ironic that you run 100 miles a week at a professional level, stop that, start running slowly with friends, and need Achilles surgery at the end of it. But had that, and then started getting an itch, or before I had the surgery, started getting an itch to, be competitive again. And then that began this current chapter that I'm in now.
I can really understand it's harder to say no when you're serving other people and helping other people than it is
Yeah.
maybe for yourself.
Yeah.
I can understand how that goes in that direction.
Yeah, it definitely was.
Talk a little bit about with how maybe your Achilles surgery overlapped with your entry into the trail and ultra community.
Yeah, so I started getting an itch back to run to run competitively again, potentially in the ultra world. I was really enjoying the trails. Signed up for a few races. Didn't get to run a few races because my kids coincidentally got sick with like stomach flus before quite a few races, or 3 races. So
As they
was
do.
not sure the world was telling me like it's time, but I was like, I want to do this. Ended up managing a 50-mile, went to bed that evening. My best friend said to me that evening, like, how are you feeling? And I was like, I think I want to give this a go. But then I was like, yeah, 2 thoughts. 1, I think I want to give this a go. And 2, there is a spot on my heel that is absolutely killing me. It is 10 out of 10 painful, like something is wrong. That turned out to be my Achilles that needed desperately to be worked on. And so, yeah, that choice of having Achilles surgery, Haglund's deformity removal, cleaning up my Achilles was with the intention of, I want to give competitive running, I'm 37 years old. I know I don't have forever. I want to give it one more go and see what I can do.
Back up just a little bit there because you skated over so fast. I tested out the trails. I did a few trail races and I ran a 50-mile. Give us more detail. What was the 50-mile race that you did?
Well, I say that because, as I said, I had 3 races that I didn't get to the start line of because of my kid's sickness. Those were all 50Ks. So
Okay.
at that point, I was kind of like, you know what? I'm just going to skip over the 50K because clearly the world doesn't want, I'm very much like a signs person. Clearly the world doesn't want me to do a 50K. It keeps stopping me. So let's just jump over that and go to the next distance. So yes, I did the Bryce Canyon 50-mile in 2023. I won it. It was like the 4th fastest time for a woman. So I knew I did well. I think it was like 4th overall. But I also knew that was not a tier 1 race. So you couldn't really say like, oh, here's the next best thing or anything, because there wasn't really anyone who was at that top level. So yes, decided to run this 50-mile. I had been running in the trails. But even going into that, I was still running less than half the mileage I was an elite. So it wasn't fully committed. It was kind of a like, let's see how it goes. But then that 50-mile affirmed like, yes, I want to give this a go.
So with that surgery and then the recovery process to come after, this is a pretty hardy recovery,
Yes.
I believe. Talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be an intense surgery process. And thankfully, Stephanie Howe is a good friend of mine. She told me which surgeon to go to. She told me that it was going to be a year before I could run without pain, and 2 years before I felt like myself. And I'm not even at the 2-year mark yet. And so I had that in my mind. Thankfully, I knew it was going to be long. It was 6 months of no running, including towards the end of that, a period where my PT allowed me to run a few minutes with my best friend at Leadville. And then I had to, and then was told, actually, no, you're not ready. So take another month, which that was probably the worst part of thinking. I was like, time to get running again. And then told, no, actually, you're not ready. But yeah, it was, thousands of calf raises, half a dozen hours of PT a week and strength training. It was intense and so slow. And then in terms of the progression, but then the hardest part actually was watching my fitness come back, because it felt like I got stuck in a time warp for about 3 months of where everything was so hard physically. And I was so sore after my runs and everything. So that was probably the most difficult part. And then, over the course, I've actually for 2025, I have kind of a beautiful progressive Strava of showing my mileage going up from like 20 up to 70 plus over the course of, 10 months or something. So it felt slow, but when I look at it that way, I'm like, actually, that's a very pleasing Strava map chart to look at.
Yeah. Talk about UTCT. Where did this idea enter your mind? And when did you feel like you were in a healthy enough spot to be able to start working toward it for real?
Yeah, I knew that I wanted to do 100K after that 50 mile. That's the obvious next step. Um, and I wanted to do something that if I was going to be competitive or try and be competitive or, see what I was capable of, I knew the first thing I wanted was just, you got to just finish the first one. It needs to be something where I'm not trying to be competitive against other women in this first race. It is about proving to myself my Achilles is healed and healthy and recovered. So that was number one. But I wanted to prove to myself also that I had learned from my previous running and was not picking the fastest race or the race where I could do best, but I was picking something that was immersed in nature because it was, beautiful and I could look up and take in my surroundings, as opposed to towards the end of my marathoning career where I was just staring at the floor. Like I could have been anywhere. Could have been on like a track because I just was staring at the ground. And then I wanted to do it as like an adventure. I wanted it to be something that was difficult and exploratory and not easy to compare. And so, yeah, one of the downsides of having your best friend be one of the best ultra runners in the world, being Ryan Montgomery, he brought this race to me, and at first I said no, absolutely not. I'm not going to Cape Town for a race. But then it kind of wedged itself in my brain. And so for a few months, I'd like click on it every now and again and be like, no, I'm not doing that one. And then eventually I was like, actually, this does kind of seem perfect. Like it's an adventure and it's in Cape Town. I've always wanted to go to Cape Town. It's difficult and it is going to be an accomplishment to even finish. And so, yeah, it took me a good month of looking at the thing and having committed mentally before I actually registered. But then once I did it, it was really exciting to build towards it. And I was fully committed to the training in a way I hadn't been in, 7-8 years. And so it was very exciting building up to it. And yeah, I ran it on November 22nd, 2025.
I think it's so smart to hear you talk about the check marks you put in place for yourself in what you were seeking in this first step up in distance, but also like first true training block and race back after surgery. And UTCT really does hit all of those marks. It's a very challenging course. Difficult to compare is a good way to put it. Talk a little bit about the race itself and just your experience out there. This is, you're talking about the Bryce Canyon 50. This is in duration, in climate, in elevation, just a completely different experience. What was that experience like? What was the preparation like? What did you carry? I have so many questions. I'll ask more as we get into it.
Well, this is actually the first podcast I've done post race, so we can go into whatever and whenever. The preparation was a lot. I definitely felt like there's so much I didn't know about trail running and like understanding things. And actually, one of the things that comes to mind in the race that I didn't think about was I'd always seen people in trail putting their hands on their knees when they hiked up. And I thought that was because they were like so tired that they had to put their hands on their knees. But then I started getting really bad backache like halfway. And I was like, what is going on with my back? Like, why is my back aching? And then I got told afterwards that the reason people put their hands on their thighs is to take the weight off their back, which I didn't even know like until afterwards. So I realized during that training period that there was so much I didn't know. But the biggest thing we focused on, well, there was two things. We knew the climbing the vert was going to be bigger than anything I'd ever done. So we focused on that. And then the technical. I did the most I could possibly do here in Chattanooga. I prepared as best I could for that technicality. Looking back now, there's nothing I could have done here that would have prepared me for that. But the downside maybe of that, what I said a few minutes ago about my only focus being getting across the finish, was it did at times, often slow me down because I was not prepared to take any risks. I mean, seeing people from these men coming from behind me, bombing down these hills, and I just don't have the hours of training on trails to be able to do that, or in that moment be prepared to do that. There was just, the risk wasn't worth it for me. And so a lot of the training was focused on technical, coming from a road marathoner who picked courses like CIM, Chicago, London. Couldn't be further away from what I did. So I was just inexperienced, but I really enjoyed the process. I enjoyed seeing my body adapt, particularly to the back-to-back long runs. My husband, at one point, Jason Coop was kind enough to talk to my husband about like what would be best for me to focus on. And so we just did his overall suggestion. And I can't remember if I answered your other question.
What kinds of things do you have to carry? I mean, you're going out for, like, what was the distance in between crew access, and how much do you have to carry from point to point?
It was between, well, the longest stretch was, I think, about 4 hours between, but most of the time it was about 2.5 hours between seeing crew. But the race has a very strict mandatory gear requirement. And this was another piece I did not practice and should have because of, again, the weight on my back. But we had to carry waterproof pants, waterproof jacket, long sleeve thermal pants, buff, gloves, hat, a first aid kit, maybe 2 or 3 other things, like space blanket. Like, we had a ton of stuff, and you had to have 300 calories in reserve at any point, 500 mils of water any point. And so it was a lot on my back, which was something, again, I hadn't considered how that would impact me. In addition to all the water weight that you're carrying around through hydration. So that was a whole big learning curve, and understanding these like mandatory requirements. There is no wiggle room there. There's no like, it's supposed to be 80 degrees, which it was, so you don't need it. We needed it regardless. And one thing I didn't account for was wearing an ice bandana. As that ice melts, it melts into your pack, which then soaks everything, and then it holds the water weight. So, yes, it was a lot to carry. I mean, and never mind the fuel. One of my proudest things was I was on my precision flow gel every 24 minutes through the whole time. I was really proud that I actually did it and got, 78 grams of carbs an hour in, which is more than double I ever did before. And so I was very proud of that. But obviously, that's weight you're carrying around for hours. So it was definitely a different experience to other races I'd done in marathon, where you're trying to have as little on you as possible.
Talk a little bit about it. Sounds like you learned a ton in terms of logistics and strategy and training along the way. Talk about what you learned about yourself out there along the way in accomplishing and pushing through this huge task and difficult race.
Well, I'm going to take this in a direction you don't expect. And one thing I have learned since that is a negative is that I reach a point of I can't do this and panic quite easily. And I lean on the people around me to solve it for me. And so one thing I have come to realize, for example, in that race at mile 90K, I got lost, and it cost me at least 20 minutes plus finishing in the light, which adds that golden hour, whatever. I mean, it is so hard to run on technical trails during that golden hour. You can't see a thing, or at least I couldn't see a thing. Maybe I need glasses, but so getting lost. But I immediately panic called Ryan and just was like, what do I do? I don't know what to do. And so I have learned since that I have a lot of work to do in terms of like problem solving myself, rather than immediately jumping to calling someone for help. So that was a negative. What I've learned about myself is I have growth there ahead. But what did I learn? I think probably what you would expect in what you can handle. Particularly, I would say never having even touched close to the vert that I did on that race and managing to keep being strong on the uphills. I think it affirmed to me where my strengths are, how well I could do if I did get into a course and a race that is more suited to me. I think I really think there's a lot of potential there, and I am excited for what could be ahead. Maybe choosing something that isn't quite on such an extreme of difficulty. Not I want difficult courses, but the technicality. So that piece, and I would say the nutrition is the other piece that sticks out to me, as someone who underfueled in my life and in my running itself, going to where I was on my fueling perfectly almost. I really learned surprisingly how good you feel when you actually are fueled versus when the bottom falls out and trying to run on fumes.
I feel like that's a thing you have to feel for yourself to fully understand and grasp the difference that it makes, the impact
Absolutely.
that it makes.
And actually, it's been interesting coming back from running since that race, and race runs where I've gone more than an hour and 15 and I don't have nutrition. I can feel my energy just go, and I think now I know what that feels like. Whereas before it was like, oh, I'm just tired. So it's really affirmed it that, oh, I guess you do need nutrition while you're running.
I really love too that you touched on that self-sufficiency and learning how to problem solve for yourself out there in the moment. I think that is actually a really common either experience or fear and concern for women in trail and ultra, going out into the mountains, going out onto a trail by yourself and having that self-sufficiency. I think it's a real skill to learn. And I think there's a real benefit to sort of what we talked about before, having people in your life who can sort of be that example for you or show you or teach you how to do those common things to be self-sufficient or learn how to solve the problems that are common to face.
Yeah, and I think I'm a very independent woman. I'm a very determined, stubborn, courageous woman, whatever. But I still, like, if I have a car problem, I immediately call my husband and I'm like, fix this for me. There's definitely many of us were raised to feel like a man has to solve it for you or help you or whatever. And so that's some growth that I've really been thinking a lot about. And I think many of us do struggle with that of like, calling someone to help. But, as Ryan has reminded me since, like, ultra running is about problem solving. And I've watched Ryan have these horrible things come up, like in Western States and in Leadville, and problem solving through it. So I have these examples now, and I see the contrast between myself problem solving and others. So I think that is something a lot of women can work on. And if someone listening to this is resonating, like, I'm out there with you, because I am definitely a call for help first and then figure it out myself second.
I want to make sure we get to this aspect of our conversation too, in talking about, as you are fully immersing yourself in the trail and ultra community, just things that you are observing in general about the community coming from the road aspect and a history on the roads. I wonder, Western States maybe is a good example. I know you've been out there a couple years, and this past year specifically, I heard a lot of talk, I wasn't there myself this year, about the crowds and the fandom and the industry. And like, we are really on the edge and going over the edge into real growth, and a lot of people coming into the sport, a lot of eyes coming into the sport, a lot of money coming into the sport. Let's start here. What are your perceptions of things that you feel like the trail and ultra community is doing well? And then I'll ask the other question.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me doing well is environmentally. When I try and bring up the idea of carrying your own bottle to a road runner, they're like, excuse me? Whereas I'm like, trail runners carry their own hydration for 12 hours or 24, and they're just fine. Like, I think you could manage it for 3 hours or an hour or whatever. So I definitely admire the like leave no trace element. On road running, people throw their gels on the floor, cups on the floor. Men pee on the donated clothes and start. There's so much like disregard for a bigger picture that I don't think is the case with trail. I do feel like there's a lot more intentionality there, and consciousness. However, obviously, as more money and more brands come in, you start getting more freebies and swag and kind of that same approach coming in. So I will be watching this carefully to see what happens as more money comes in, because brands don't often think about the impact of what they're doing. What else do I really admire the team element of trail in terms of I will be very interested to see if this stays as well as it gets more competitive. Road running, at least when I was running, it was very much like you didn't speak to your people you were racing against any time before the race. It was like they were sworn enemies, and I don't get that sense from trail. I very much get the sense of you did your best, that was amazing, congrats, you beat me, I'm happy for you, for the most part. And then one interesting thing I'm interested to see how it goes is people like me, or as I saw yesterday, not that I put myself in her bucket, but Molly Seidel running, a course record, as this influx of us road runners comes in, it will be interesting to see what happened, because, myself doing Cape Town, it's a totally different world to a flat road race. So, it is going to be fascinating to see, like I said about the technical, I can't force that. I can't add, there's no shortcut to 1,000 hours of technical trail. You just have to do it. And so those of us coming from the road are at a real, not disadvantage, but we have work to do there. And there's no forcing that forward. So I'm just like enjoying that piece of myself, trying to find the line between going faster over trails, but also I'm not that good at it. So if I go too fast, then I will fall on my face. So where do you give yourself grace, but also like push yourself a bit? So yeah, I did that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the other part of the question then is, what do you see coming in that maybe is clear and tangible? Because I think there's a lot of like what ifs. I don't know where this is going to grow and evolve. Is there anything that you see that we need to improve on, or we need to be aware of now in the moment?
I would say it would speak to that piece of as more money flows in, it becomes very easy for brands to shape it how they want it to be, and to turn it into what they want it to be. So I would say, yeah, the community making sure to be vocal if something doesn't feel right, because once something gets ingrained as this is the way it's done, it's very hard to undo. And while the brands are still entering, I think the community still has the ability to mold it, but once they're established in there, and there's a few brands obviously that come to mind for all of us of who are already pretty set there, but yeah, as it brings more and more people in, more and more brands in, I think I'd say maybe like, if you have the ability, be careful where you're spending your money, be careful where you're accepting money, think about it, follow it all the way through before you sign or accept something.
I love that.
That's a good question.
Okay.
Too.
2 more questions and then I'll let you go. The first is the obvious, like, where are you going next in terms of your trail running and your racing? What is lighting you up? What are you looking at for 2026?
Yeah, I definitely want to find a race that is more runnable. I still want the climbs. I definitely proved to myself the climbs are my strength. Going up Table Mountain, I was so intimidated by it. It is an extremely difficult climb. For many people, it is like the hardest thing they ever do to hike up it. So to have that only like 15 miles into the race was intense, but I didn't even stop once. So that really affirmed that the uphills are my strength. So I'm looking forward to finding a race, and we are working on it, which one it's going to be. I still want to keep that adventure part of it. I still want to keep the nature in it. So that narrows out a few. Have to say, Javelina is not on my list of not on my list of races that lights me up. And I say that because people know the course of Javelina. It is in the desert. It is in nature, but it's a 5 loop, or I guess for the 100 mile. It's a looped course that is, not my jam. So I love what they are doing there, but that's not going to be on my race list. So I'm looking more like mountainous, wooded, very I want to say Marin-esque, but I'm not running in Marin. I have no Marin plans right now, but that kind of feel is where I'm going for. So yeah, I'd like to pick a race, hopefully sign up for one soon. And then the question was, what am I excited for? Okay. And then I'm excited to just now I've got my fitness. I mean, I built from zero. So I got through the part where I was, going from 0 to 70. And so now that I've got that base fitness, I'm excited to see what gains I can have and find ways to keep the joy in there. And yeah, we'll see. I'm not fully decided yet. Oh, that's what I was going to say. What I would like to do, my focus, I would like to qualify for UTMB, CCC, and maybe hopefully make that the kind of focus race for the year. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
That was one of my questions is, are you looking at the step up to 100 miles? Are you looking to do another 50, 100K in a different environment, in a different style?
100 miles, no. I really thought I would finish this 100K and be like, woo, but I'm still, no. Someday I think
I respect it.
I will, but the urge is not there whatsoever right now. That still just seems unimaginable. But no, I would like to do more 100Ks, 50 miles, that kind of distance, definitely. So there'll be one in the spring and then, hopefully something in the fall.
Awesome. I'll be excited to see what you decide on.
Thank you. Once I know.
Okay. Last question. This is the final question I ask of everyone who comes on the podcast. And that is, if you could go back and give your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'm sorry, I'm going to give you an answer you're probably not going to like. I wouldn't say anything. I just believe we learn the things we're meant to learn when we learn them. I believe I wouldn't have listened anyway. And my journey unfolded the way it was supposed to. So nothing.
I love it. I love it. I think that's a great answer. That's perfect. Tina, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for taking your time. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm really excited to share it as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren, and for all that you do. It's really cool. I've loved, listening to other episodes. So keep up the good work, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.